Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and it's definitely a Monday, so that must mean that it's time for Content Chat. I'm your host, Erika Heald, and today I have with me Mike Petchenik, and he and I are going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is thought leadership. And it's really fun for me because I've always been somebody who's worked, doing content, but I've also frequently had comms as part of my job. So I think I'm a little bit of a hybrid because in so many organizations, it's primarily the comms folks who are leading thought leadership, but there's so many opportunities for cross-pollination. And I hope that we'll get everybody thinking about that today. So Mike, welcome to Content Chat. And please let folks know a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Erica.
My
I have
pleasure.
a journalism background. I spent 25 years in broadcast TV before having a midlife career crisis a couple of years back, post COVID, and decided to take my skill set into the corporate world. I left TV news and took a job at a tech startup company, a very small, scrappy tech startup, as their director of communications, and spent about a year and a half there doing everything from content marketing to PR, internal communications, external communications. Pretty much, I was the chief cook and bottle washer. And about a year ago, I decided to hang my own shingle and went out on my own and run my own consulting agency where I do a variety of things, including PR. I do video production. I just launched a true crime brand with a former colleague of mine called Trial Watcher. So go check it out. And we'll be doing a podcast as well. So trying to take all of my writing and communication skills and parlay them into a new career at this
I
stage of my
love
life.
it. And I'm similarly a recovering journalist, but because I graduated into a really cruddy job market and moved to San Francisco immediately, I kind of, the journalism aspect of what I did quickly became my side hustle or my
Mm.
extra jobs that I would take on, because I definitely was not able to support myself in San Francisco on a journalist salary,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
it's tough.
But I
It's
love
tough
it.
even in a market where they might pay you a semblance of a salary these days.
Well, they do, as long as you're working on the brand side, doing brand content journalism and things
Yeah.
like that, which I think is unfortunately true in a lot of markets.
Yeah.
But I thought we should just kick things off by talking about, and I alluded to this in the open, there are a bunch of different ways you can structure your thought leadership programs and the way that you can get it done. So I'd love it if you could share from your perspective some of what you've seen that's worked really well, and maybe some of the structures that haven't worked quite so well for putting together a really good internal thought leadership program.
Yeah, I'd like to tackle this from the PR perspective, given my background in journalism and in my current role where I work with a variety of corporate clients, helping them put their thought leadership programs together and then leveraging those for earned media opportunities. I think
Perfect.
the first step is always to identify, who the thought leaders are. It might seem obvious, but just because they're on your team doesn't necessarily make them the experts that we should be pushing out and talking about. And then once we've identified them, what I always want to do is just conduct a real in-depth interview, figure out with them what are the facets of their expertise, what makes them tick, why are they interesting, why are people outside of the organization going to care about what they have to say, and then that will inform our overall strategy as to how do we put them out there as the thought leader when it comes to specifically earned media opportunities.
Totally agree with all of that. I am famous, I think, for saying to people, just because it's the CEO doesn't mean he should be, part of the thought leadership program. Because in many organizations, the CEO is really more like an operating partner in a VC fund where they're out there, they're doing the work, they have so many things on their plate that thought leadership is not something they're going to have time for. They might have time to be the spokesperson so that when you have a big announcement that you can give them the talking points, you can get them on screen and they can be the face of the brand in that way. But it doesn't mean that they necessarily are the right person to be out there and to be the leader, for your thought leadership program.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And to your question about what hasn't worked, I have seen instances where a company will put somebody up as a thought leader, but then they run into that issue of scheduling, of just their time being so precious that they aren't able to have buy-in to that program. And then when you don't have buy-in and you don't have that collaborative spirit because they're just so busy doing other things, then it's not successful.
Totally. And sometimes people also think that the thought leadership program and figuring out, who are the right people, what they should be talking about, et cetera. Sometimes they feel like they can just outsource that to their PR agency. And, while I think PR agencies certainly have their finger on the pulse of, what they're hearing from journalists, what they've been seeing placed across clients, I don't know that you can have the expectation that they're mind readers and that they can somehow intuit, what formats are going to work for your thought leaders and what topics they really are going to be able to have those great anecdotes and the supporting experience for. So I think that's another trap people can fall into.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. And I think it's really just about identifying the right people and putting them in the right spots and then coming up with the right treatments for it so that you're going to be effective.
Definitely. That kind of brings up another kind of big issue. You and I have both worked with startups and in larger organizations. And I found that the approach to thought leadership can be very, very different. And in a way, it feels like our startup clients, they kind of have the edge in a way because people always think, hey, the big companies have the edge. But I think actually the startups can have the edge just because they don't have so many people to have the level of bureaucracy or
Yeah.
approvals or, even, regulations to have to think about.
Yeah, I agree with that. Having worked in a startup where the CEOs were the subject matter experts because they started the company because of the pain point that they were feeling in their own life, it made them not only the perfect spokesperson, but also the perfect thought leader to share their expertise and how are we solving for this problem. When you're dealing with a big corporate entity, the CEO is pretty far removed in a lot of ways from what's going on operationally, or specifically in each niche, or each segment of the company. And I can think off the top of my head, one of my corporate clients are a big wholesale insurance company. I've never put out the CEO as the thought leader. It's always the subject matter experts who are really laser focused on their specific track within the company that we're putting out there. And because we're not having to deal with that bureaucracy, they're available, they're ready and willing to participate. Whereas the CEO is just they're dealing with much bigger issues, and so it's harder to get through to them. So I think the startups definitely have an edge when it comes to being able to put together a thought leadership program much more nimbly.
100%. And of course, when you are in those bigger organizations and you're trying to do the thought leadership, frequently it ends up taking so long too, because you'll be in a situation where you need to find the right ghostwriter, you need to have them have some availability, then they need to schedule a call and do all of these other things. And so the trajectory for how long it frequently can take so long that unless you're in a very staid industry that isn't having any kind of disruption, and I can't even name one industry right now that fits, it can be really difficult to do unless you have somebody, internally who is that ghostwriter who can go up, lurk around at the office and, sneak in to get those kinds of quotes. Because of course, if you're not interviewing those thought leaders, then it's not thought leadership, it's just content creation. But
Right.
that's a different conversation we could be having.
Yeah. And if it's taking 3-4 months to pin down that thought leader for the interview, you've missed the boat because the news cycle's moved on or something else has happened that where it's maybe not germane to the conversation anymore.
Totally. One of the things I really like to do when working with a couple of, like, whenever there's a situation where there's more than one thought leader at a company, which is ideal, you don't ever want to be in that situation where there's just that one person who has a lofty title about thought leadership, who then, of course, inevitably retires or leaves for a competitor, and then you have nothing. I like to get everybody on board with sort of like what the major themes are that are important to the industry, and then develop thought leadership, basically like the equivalent of a speaker profile. But it's
Hmm.
really, just a thought leadership profile that lays out what they want to be known for the ideal kinds of ways that they, to work with them, things, that we can share as examples that show that they know their stuff. But I'd love to hear how you've approached, really, what do you like to get to that point? You have to actually either spend a lot of time with that person. So that usually means you're in-house. But if you don't have that, you're not that close, what are some of the questions you can ask to really uncover the right places to be, to be developing this person as a thought leader?
Yeah, I think you have to go into the process being innately curious, which is what my life was as a journalist. In general, I'm just a curious person. So I ask a lot of questions. And so when I go into one of these interviews and I'm trying to kind of peel back the layers of the onion on who this person is and what makes them tick and why are they interesting, it's really just a lot of why. Not necessarily what or who, but why. Why did you get into something? Why are you passionate about this? Why should your expertise matter to somebody else? And it might be adversarial. It might sound that way, but really what I'm trying to do is just sort of like pick at them to get them to open up and share, because the more we know as the content people and as the PR folks about them, the easier time we're going to have sharing their story with somebody who has no idea who they are, what they're all about. So it's
Yeah.
really just asking probing questions and being curious.
Agree with all of that, and I would just add that I also try to understand, are they somebody who wants to be out there creating content that then we're distributing, or that they wanna be out there speaking, doing webinars, doing, presentations, or are they somebody who wants to really focus on having those media interviews? Because those are, like, 4 very different types of thought leadership opportunities
Hmm.
that different people have different levels of comfort. Like if you have somebody that needs to have written talking points or a teleprompter in front of them, you don't want them having those kinds of off the cuff podcast conversations or having them necessarily even talk to a journalist unless it's something very product specific or very concrete that they're well versed in.
Yeah, I would say bottom line, though, they need to have their key messages ready to go. So whether they are going on a podcast or they're speaking at a conference or they're just talking to maybe a print reporter or a trade reporter, they still need to know their stuff. So whatever avenue they're taking, it's still really important to sort of get to the heart of the issues that they're going to be comfortable talking about, getting them prepped for that, and that might require some media training,
Yep.
but to sort of get them up to speed, because at the end of the day, the message is still the message, regardless of the medium.
And what's funny to me about that is I don't know about you, but I've certainly been on the content side of things where we've had, like, either like research findings or a really great post that's gotten a lot of traction somewhere that that person hasn't necessarily been paying attention. So
Hmm.
let's say, for example, that they're not very active on LinkedIn, so they haven't seen that a post that they authored is getting a lot of comments. And then you can sometimes end up in an embarrassing situation where that person can be talking about the same topic somewhere else without making the very, dead obvious reference or request for a link of somebody back to the related um, the related content. And I think that happens because in many organizations, the comms team doesn't report into marketing. It reports into the CEO. And it may be on a different, you may be on the floor with the CEO if you're in a bigger company. Um, and so you can end up in these situations where the content and the comms teams don't really know what's happening with each other. And so they
Yeah.
can't kind of support each other's work. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to really align those teams and make sure that everybody's working towards the same goal. Because thought leadership is content, and content, some of the content is thought leadership. So you got to be cross pollinating.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive, right? So I think it's important for everybody to be on the same page, for there to be cross-functional conversations happening about who's doing what. Um, Especially if you're in an organization where you're trying to pin down that thought leader, why not do the interview together? Why not be in the room at the same time or virtually, so that
Yeah.
everybody is hearing the same thing at the same time, so that then you can sort of divide and conquer. What do you need? What do I need? How can we work together? And of course, I always say this: PR and marketing, while they are sort of birds of the same feather, they're not the same, right? The messaging is different. PR people shouldn't be going out and pitching markety or salesy copy, and the marketing team has its mandate, right? So once that is established and everybody understands their roles, they still need to be working together, and they still need to be in lockstep, because you don't want what you just described to happen.
'Cause it's sad. I mean, when you have one of those situations where you have, somebody having a really great media interview and they're talking about something and they're being quoted extensively and they don't mention the survey results that you just published that, they're even quoting from, or they do mention them, but they don't say, "Hey, can I send it to you?" to the journalist after. Ugh.
Yeah,
It breaks my heart because,
yeah,
9 times out of 10, if it is really good content and it's not gated, you can very frequently get a link to it, which is so valuable because then you get eyeballs on it, you get your perspective out there, and you don't if you didn't ask, or if you gate it as well. Gotta
yeah.
have
And
that
I would
stuff
say,
there.
don't ever pawn your LinkedIn profile or whatever medium you're using off to just some comms person. If you're the thought leader, like, you should be in it yourself. You should be monitoring it yourself. And I get people are busy and they don't always have time to do that. And the
That
comms
has
team
to be
should
one of the
certainly,
requirements, right?
yeah,
You've gotta be willing to engage with people about the
yeah,
content you create. If you
yeah,
just throw content out there and do nothing, then how can you be a thought leader if you're not having dialogue?
yeah. Be the word leader is in there somewhere. I believe. Take
You know
ownership.
and what's funny is I think if more people had the conversation with their thought leaders about how when they don't engage with their own content, how they're training the algorithm that people who look like them, people in their roles, and people in their network are not interested in anything they have to say. I think once people realize that they're training the algorithm to ignore their content, that frequently has the right impact that you're looking for, where they go, "Oh, gosh, I guess I do actually need to be out there."
Yeah, no, I mean, that's for sure. You don't ever want to find yourself in a situation where you put something out and then it's just crickets, because the algorithm figured out that you're not engaging with anybody. You're not putting out anything that's worth reading, which is
Yeah.
not true, because you have something to say. You have expertise, but if you're not engaging with people, then a tree fell and nobody heard it fall.
Yeah. And, I think that's gonna be even increasingly a big issue because if people are using a tool like Perplexity for doing research, or they're using, ChatGPT for doing research, and I know there are people like, "Oh, you should never be using any of these tools for doing research." Well, too bad. People are doing it, and tools like Perplexity actually will show you they cite their sources, so you can actually see where they're getting the perspective from. But I would encourage folks, if you have a thought leader who's not engaging, have them use one of those tools and ask the tool who they are and what they're known for. And if it can't find out anything, it's going to tell you that. And you're going to feel bad about it because then you can go ahead and have like their biggest competitor from a content standpoint and ask it who that person is and what they're known for. And then they'll see, oh, wait, that person, there are all these citations from all of these different places because they're actually getting out there and engaging. So I actually like AI tools for the ability to show people, oh, it's okay if you don't want to do this, but here's the consequences of
Yeah,
sitting it out.
yeah. And you send them you export that and say, hey, look at this. You're missing out.
Exactly. Or if they're in the office with you, I guess you can print it out too if they're those kinds of folks who have too many
Do
things in
people
their
still
email
print
inbox.
things? Is that a okay?
I think so. I think I was going to say something really terrible, but I think there are some people who probably, in some leadership positions, um, do you have an assistant who prints out important emails for them to read because they're not at their desk, or they don't have the attention span when they're at their computer because they're doing 50 other things.
Yeah.
So I think, unfortunately, yes, I think trees are still dying for things that they did not need to.
Unnecessarily. Yeah.
So let's see. When you think about the work that you've been doing most recently, what are the content channels and formats that you think are having the most impact right now, at least for the kinds of teams you're working with?
So LinkedIn is still number one in my book. I think the opportunity to share your ideas and connect with others in the business world is incredible. And if you're not there, you're missing out. I would venture to say anybody who's listening to this probably I'm preaching to the choir here, because and again, I'm going to look at this through the view of a PR person. Your owned media assets are really key to potentially bringing you earned media opportunities. And or sales opportunities. We talk about brand awareness. Just a brief anecdote. One of the thought leaders who I've been working with at a company, we got an earned media placement for him to do a pretty in-depth interview about his really unique story. He came here from another country at a young age, overcame a lot of obstacles to become the first person in his family to go to college, and then he is now in a leadership role at a large corporation. And he posted the piece on his LinkedIn page with a quote from it and some sort of nice perspective on how the piece went in his life. And a prospect he had been trying to get in front of forever saw the piece on his LinkedIn page and sent him a message. Hey, I saw this piece. What a wonderful story. So inspiring. I know we've been trying to connect. Let's get a coffee on the calendar. So
Yeah.
and the point, and he sent an email to the whole team. He's like, you never know who's reading your stuff. You never know who is consuming your content, your thought leadership. And it's so true. And I'd love to follow up with him and find out if he converted that to a sale. But,
Yeah, I'd love to know that too.
it's an example of using LinkedIn in a positive way. Not only to build your community, but also just to sort of get your message out there. It's all about that. I still believe in the blog. I still believe that blogs are great, whether they're on your own page or you're sharing them, through social media. I'm a relatively new company owner myself. I launched my own business about a year ago, and candidly, I'm not good at being um, intentional about posting a lot. When something comes into my head, I'm like, oh, I should write something about that. I do, and then I cross post it on my LinkedIn page, and I've got a Facebook profile and some other places. But I really think there is something to being consistent about it and being thoughtful and intentional about it. And it does bear fruit. People get interesting. I shared something the other day. I had one of my clients asked me to put together a best practices for dealing with the media, so that they could share it with their clients, when a reporter comes calling. And I was like, you know what, this would actually make for a pretty good blog post. So I turned it into that, and I put it out there, and like 1,000 impressions, which is pretty good for me, being a small business owner. But it just means people are watching it, and so
Yeah.
it's just proof in the pudding that you got to put it out there, because you never know who is going to listen to it. Will it lead to somebody calling me to help them with their business? I don't know. But that wasn't the point. The point was to get it out there. So
And you honestly never know what little, element of feeling like they know you or feeling an affinity for your story or feeling like they have something in common with you. You never know what that detail is going to be. So it
yeah,
is really important to just be out there and be yourself and not be trying to just be like everyone else, which sounds funny to say in a conversation about thought leadership.
yeah.
But I think we've all been in those meetings where it's like, well, what's so and so doing? Oh, we should do that. It's like, no, 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 we should not do that. What makes us different? What makes you different? What are your experiences? And because that's what actually is going to resonate.
I think the key word here is authenticity, because if you're not authentic, people see right through it, and then it doesn't have the same impact. Because if you're just saying it to say it, or you think it's because you need to say something, or you need to have an opinion or a hot take, it's not doing you any good.
And I know that's probably maybe the hardest part of stepping out there and really focusing on doing thought leadership well is being okay with being yourself, being a little different. Because a lot of us have worked in big companies where it was not really encouraged to stick out, where they They wish that you wouldn't interpret the dress code in the way that you do, for example. I've been that person. And now, of course, as you can see, when I'm doing my webinars or trainings or podcasts like this, I'm in my home office and it's full of all the books I love and toys, etc. Because this is the stuff that, frankly, this is the stuff that somebody gets excited about. They don't get excited about, oh, you're wearing some bland corporate approved navy blue blazer. That's not, no one's going to get excited and feel an affinity for you. And if they do, how frightening. And perhaps yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, is that somebody you want to have an affinity for you? I don't know.
I guess it completely depends on what you're doing, right?
Right.
Are you a man in finance? In which case, maybe, that's important to be wearing the outfit.
Right.
But it's about figuring out who you want to be and then going out there and living that every day with the content that you're creating and the conversation. So love that. In addition to, all of the different kinds of like written content and doing various kinds of pitching folks to be, part of their media channels, I'm seeing a lot more video content from individual thought leaders than ever before, and especially on LinkedIn. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about video content and, how to, how important is it? And, how do you get people to even consider it? Because people have a tendency to think of thought leadership as being something that you should do that's scrappy and, scrappy and pitch based. And that video content is something that's labor intensive and expensive and should be done by the brand team. So
No.
let's debunk that.
Yeah. Well, so as a former TV guy, I'm certainly partial to video because I just feel like it can showcase your thought leaders in a way that the written word simply can't. Right? It shows their personality. It allows the viewers to connect with them on a personal level. It allows them to answer really important questions around a topic and be maybe even more impactful than if it were just a blog or a white paper or something like that. And whether it's on social media or through your own channels, it can work well. And to your point about it being expensive and unattainable, it's not. I mean, come on. We all have one of these nowadays. It's not hard to take it, shoot yourself. I think TikTok has ruined production quality for all of us. It's not expected to be on a 4K camera with a multi-camera shoot. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a place for that. And my friends who are really in that space would probably push back on me even saying that you can achieve it with your phone. But I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know, right? But I think there is a place for it. I saw a post today actually from your friend of mine, Julie Revelant, who's a great writer, about the length of these videos now and how studies have shown that they need to be even shorter and even more pithy than they were before because people, as you know, people just don't have attention span. So the nice thing is you can produce more of them. The downside is, of course, you need to be much more succinct. Brevity is king, but you need to get your points across much more cogently and quickly.
Totally. And we did just have a question and a comment about if corporate videos are coming back in short form and about event coverage making great videos. And I certainly agree with that. I love when we have a good event footage.
Yeah, I have a great buddy, Will Frampton. If you're looking for a great video production company, McLeod Media is his company. Formerly based here in Atlanta, but I think he's in Omaha, Nebraska. But he travels, has camera, will travel. But he does a lot of these kinds of events where he'll go to a corporate setting, and it's like shooting fish in a barrel. You're there with all the thought leadership, all the experts have great things to say, and he'll just line them up one by one and just knock out a bunch of interviews back to back. And it's not some documentary style video that ends up on the company's website or housed on YouTube somewhere. They are leveraging the heck out of it all over the place. A lot on LinkedIn, of course, but it's shorts. It's like the equivalent of a YouTube short or a TikTok or an Instagram reel. It's shorts. It's short to the point, but it's great content, and it's showcasing these experts in a way that you just can't achieve through the written word.
And it's such sexy content that you get at the end of it all too. Because So I've had a few VC clients and had the privilege of being invited to their to like their Founders Day events or their other kind of big portfolio company events. And that's such the great opportunity. We always will, get a room near the ballroom where we're having all of the stuff for the day and have my topics in advance. And I would get to interview CEOs on camera. I was not doing the camera work, so be professional camera, but I'd be interviewing them about a range of topics. And then we would take all of that different footage and, cut it up and sometimes have two of them in the same video on the same topic or have three of them, whenever we found stuff that really fit well together. And it made for great social content because it was people from companies that people wanted to hear from. And it was just short to the point because it's not like we wanted to keep them on Investor Day. We didn't want to keep them for more than 5-10 minutes. And that included getting them, mic'd up and ready. I would do a really fast 3-minute interview with them and get them out of there. And then we would have, 15 different pieces of content minimum come out of that kind of a session. So I think people can underestimate the, how much they can get from doing this kind of video content.
Yeah. I mean, look how quickly you filled up your calendar with great, usable, interesting pieces of video and audio from the people that you want your audience to hear from.
Totally.
So
now, since you
is.
are talking from the PR perspective,
Yeah.
every time I have collaborated on thought leadership, there inevitably comes well, we would like to get an interview in the Wall Street Journal, and I want to be on, CNN or CNBC or whatever the holy grail program is for that executive.
Yeah.
So I'd
Wouldn't we
love it
all?
wouldn't we all, right?
Yeah.
So I'd love it if you could walk through, what it actually takes to get those kinds of top tier media interviews, because I think folks have an unrealistic expectation about how easy it is or what people are actually looking to see from a thought leader before they would even consider having them for either of those kinds of opportunities.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is it's called earned media for a reason, because you've earned the privilege to be included in that coverage. It doesn't just happen, right? The journalists don't owe you anything. And just speaking from my perspective over 20 plus years in news, the number of just horrible pitches I would get in my inbox every day from well-meaning PR people who clearly didn't do their homework, had no idea what my newsroom covered. I love to tell this story, and I'll tell your audience the same story. So I worked at the ABC News affiliate in Atlanta, very hard news station. I covered a lot of crime and courts and cops and all of that.
I'm
and some
shocked to
city
hear that you covered crime and that now you love true crime. Shocking.
I love talking about it. I don't know that I love the true crime, but yes.
Fair enough.
Yes, qualify that. But I got a pitch in my inbox one day asking me if I ever wondered what it would be like to be a sugar daddy. And it was for some company that was like a matchmaking website for people. And of course, my answer was no, not really. Thanks, but no thanks. But the reason I tell that story is because I think it just illustrates the importance of doing your homework if you're trying to pitch yourself to a media outlet, to understand what they cover. We would have never in a million years covered that story.
Yeah.
The people there knew it, but they did what's called spray and pray, which is they just took lists of emails from, they went to like Muckrack or Cision, and they just took all these names off and just hurled a bunch of junk at the newsroom, hoping it would stick, as opposed to figuring out that Mike doesn't cover that story, so I'm not going to have any traction there. And so when you're trying to pitch yourself to any media outlet, whether it's the Wall Street Journal or CNN or Insurance Business America or any number of other fantastic trades, by the way, in the B2B space that really should be your focus, in addition to top tier media. But I think it's all about understanding what they cover, who covers it, why should they care what you have to say. And when you're pitching them, I go back to this, what I said earlier about it's not the marketing message, it's not the sales message, it's What is your unique point of view? What is newsworthy that you can share that will ultimately be interesting to the audience of that media outlet?
Yeah.
So, you know, how are you helping solve for this problem? Where do you fall within society? Who, all of these things, all these questions that the reporters are trying to answer, you need to put that hat on and think about that when you're pitching the story. And so that way, when you do pitch it, you have a much higher success rate because you're actually speaking their language, you're respecting their time, you're respecting what they do, and they're more likely to A, open your email, and B, even if it's not a story they're working on now, they might hold on to it for 5, 6 months down the road. And you might get an email saying, "Hey, you sent me something a while back. Wasn't working on it then, but now I'm interested. Can we have your CEO on as a guest? Or can we have thought leader A on?" Or, that kind of thing. So that would be my advice.
Do you feel it's important before pitching those like broadcasts, especially broadcast outlets? Do you feel like it's important that your thought leader has some example, video content? Like, do they need to have done, either some webinars or some video podcasts, or, like, what do you think is like the right thing to have that you can use to show that somebody is going to actually be able to be a great interview?
I think it's helpful, certainly. And if they haven't done it, then certainly find a way to sort of reenact it or create your own version of that, even if it's not something that ever aired anywhere or if they weren't really on a podcast. Get them in front of a camera. The more reps they do, the better they'll become at it. And so when, for example, when we share uh, our thought leaders with various media outlets, I always love to include a link to a podcast interview they've done. Have they been on TV before? Because then it illustrates to that reporter or that producer, okay, this person knows what they're doing. They're not going to be bumbling through an interview with the anchor or whomever.
They're going to
And
answer the questions.
they're going to answer the questions asked and not deflect and just move on to something else, like we see in the
People do
political
all
world.
the time. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's important. But if you're going to pitch your thought leaders for visual or audio interviews, prepare them ahead of time, media train them. I cannot stress that enough. They need to go through the reps. You cannot just throw them to the wolves and expect they're going to come across in a way that you'd want them to come across without having practiced.
Gosh, especially if your expectation is that they're going to be reading from a teleprompter and they haven't done that, because that is always a bad thing. When you can actually see someone's eyes going like this because they're reading off the screen and stopping their thoughts midway, you're like, "Oh my gosh, it's so distracting,"
It's a
as
skill.
the
It
viewer.
is. I mean, I was an anchor early in my career and I wasn't good at reading the teleprompter and I had to do it for a living. So if you're doing it as a thought leader, you better practice and you better get it down. I much prefer to just riff off the top of my head than to use a teleprompter, but not everybody can do that.
Same. I personally find that the more that I try to memorize something or to read it, the worse it goes. I'm more likely to stumble and not come across as confident or, or having any kind of enthusiasm about something because I'm too focused on getting the words that somebody wrote correctly, out of my mouth.
Yeah.
So I
And
personally think it's
especially if
terrible.
they're going to do a TV interview, they're not really going to be reading off a teleprompter. So they need to be prepared to answer questions that we believe they're going to be asked. And by the way, a lot of reporters will not send you their questions ahead of time. They'll just tell you, this is the subject or the theme we're going to talk about. You can ask, but they're not going to. I never did it. I always, because I felt like it would elicit the most spontaneous response if
Yeah.
I didn't tell them ahead of time. Because if I told them and then they wrote it down and then they were sitting there with a piece of paper and they were just reading off the piece of paper, it was inauthentic and bad television, frankly. So
Totally. But it's hard because frequently they'll be like, "Well, but I wanna know what they're gonna ask me." And it's like, "Well, we can't tell you that, but how about we do a session where I will be the reporter and I'll ask you questions."
yeah,
And it's funny because, usually they're like, "Well, I don't need that." But literally every single time I have done that with one of my thought leaders, at the end of it, they've said, "I wouldn't have thought of some of those questions, and now I know I need to go look at, I need to go look at some of this stuff because if that comes up, I want to have the numbers. Like it can really help them, to think about what is it that you're going to say and what,
Yeah.
resources can you bring that someone else can't? Because that's what's going to actually then help you help that actually air because you're going to give something that's valuable that no one else has.
Yeah. Have your key messages ready to go. Think of them in terms of sound bites, 7 to 10 seconds tops, and then bridge back to those key points every chance you get, because that's what the producers are looking for. They're going to air what you say, but if you do it in usable chunks of sound, it's much easier for them, and you're more likely to be welcome back.
100%. So that brings us to what are the things that people do that are going to get them not welcome back or, really cause them to, have wasted their time because they have, provided something in an interview that's has 0% chance of going live. I'd love to hear like some of those pitfalls that you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, so part of what I wrote about in that blog post, and I'm happy to send you the link to it, in terms of engaging with the media, was kind of things not to do.
Mhm.
So a couple things. First of all, if you get invited to do the interview, don't blow the reporter off.
That
Don't
seems
ghost.
obvious, doesn't it?
It
But it's
does, but it
not.
happens, right? Don't ghost them. Like, their time is valuable. Show them some respect. Respond to them, even if you're not the best person to answer the question. Get them somebody who can, or at least, that's why
Yep.
it's good to have a bench, other people on your team, other thought leaders available to do these kinds of things. Um, you know, Bone up on what this person covers so that when you come and talk to them, you sort of understand what they care about and why their audience is going to care about what you have to say. Don't come across like you're holier than thou. Be vulnerable, be willing to answer their questions. Certainly answer their questions, right? So that's a way to not get invited back, is if they're asking you questions and you're just being evasive, uh, because they have a job to do, and you're there to help them do their job. So you have to remember that this is not about you. It's about the content that they're putting out for their audience, and you're sort of you're helping them do it, but you're not the
Yeah,
reason for the season.
because you're not doing an infomercial.
Right. Yeah. You're there to provide context and nuance and you know, put your expertise out there to help them sort of weave it into their story. But unless it's a full page spread just about you, which those are so rare, right? You're there to add color, commentary.
Exactly. But that said, we also sometimes can end up in situations that, regardless of the thought leader, that there just can be, challenges to getting the stuff to happen. So I would also love to hear your feedback on some of the things that you find are, pretty common challenges that people can plan for and manage around. So that way they increase their likelihood that they're going to be successful.
Yeah, I think it just starts with the buy-in at the beginning, and level setting with the thought leader and the team, whether it's the comms team or the content team, everybody, what the expectations are and what the standard operating procedure is going to be when the opportunities present themselves. I think the number one issue is getting everybody on the same page and understanding the gravity of the situation in some cases, and why urgency wins the day.
Yep.
Why you can't drag your feet and be non-responsive, because I think I've seen that happen a lot, where it's like herding cat to get people to the table. And so I think if you're intentional about that up front and everybody knows what the stakes are, you're more likely to be successful when those opportunities do present themselves.
And I think the only thing I would add there is having the understanding too that when you have those quick turn kinds of requests for feedback or for an interview, etc., even if it's something that could be done, asynchronously, like it's a text-based interview, they just send you some questions. While you can have someone on your team draft those answers because they know you well enough, they've been in all those meetings, they've sat through millions of these interviews with you, you still, as the thought leader, you've got to have time to review that and to add something that the person writing it couldn't possibly know. And I've been known when I've drafted that kind of content, I will literally put in little brackets of, here's where you put in an anecdote that shows X, Y, and Z. I
Hmm.
literally put that in there in those words and I highlight it. So that way they know this is, I've set it up and I'm closing it out, but that they still have to put in the meat, because what's going to get used is not what I wrote. That's going to
Right.
help somebody understand the context around it. What's going to get used is that really interesting personal experience, because that's what people care about.
Yeah.
They don't
It
care about
has
the
to be
ChatGPT
collaborative.
summary.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Right. Exactly. It has to be collaborative. If it's not collaborative, it's worthless.
Totally agreed. Well, we do have a few minutes, so if folks have any questions, you can go ahead and type them. If you're watching this live on LinkedIn, you can type it on the event page. If you are watching this as the recap, you can certainly leave us a message on the blog post or on LinkedIn and tag us, and we'll get back to you. But before we'll see if we get some folks live who want to ask questions, because I know people sometimes they're shy. That's totally fine. I would love to hear what was like the biggest, most awesome thing that you've done in the thought leadership space where you were just so psyched about it, because I love hearing about people's wins, because I think we all could use more of that feel good kind of content in our lives. So what's something that you're super excited about or proud of?
So when I launched my company about a year ago, I didn't have any recurring clients at the time. I was just kind of new out of the gate, leveraging my network. Hey, help me, send me some business. And through LinkedIn, I got connected with a great marketing agency based here in Atlanta. They're called Liger Partners. I'll give them a shout out because they gave me a chance. They were looking for somebody to handle the earned media for their client list. And they have a really large wholesale insurance client that was really gunning to get some media coverage, especially in the trades. And so I kind of so we forged a partnership, and I had to really hit the ground running because I didn't know anything about any of these people. In fact, the person who they were working with prior to me had already done the thought leadership interviews, so I had to go back and watch hours of footage to learn who these people were. And the long story short, within a couple of weeks of starting this process, I felt like I had a pretty good handle on who everybody was. They've got when I think we're up to like 9 or 10 people on their team who are thought leaders in their respective fields. It's pretty
That's
impressive.
awesome.
And we were able to start pitching them to different media outlets in the space where they wanted to be. And within like a month, we started getting picked up. And I was like, wow, like that's really cool. Like considering I started from nothing, and I certainly am not doing this to like say I'm so great. It was a team effort because everybody at the marketing agency, they have an internal marketing director who's fantastic. We all worked together, and they really like sort of held my hand through the process to understand who these people were. But when you're coming in fresh and you don't know who any of these people are, and you have to learn what makes them tick, it's in some ways harder than if I were to have started it from scratch and I knew everybody. So I think that was a big win for us, and we've continued to sort of gain momentum, and it's becoming sort of a thing where they get covered at least once a month at least by the trades where they want to be, because we've put that out there, because PR it's a long game, and once we've earned that trust and they trust the experts that we're putting out there, it's been great. So I would say that's a win.
What's interesting to me about all that too is it really just shows how important it can be to have that external person come in to help you kind of, be the catalyst for or coalesce what your thought leadership program is going to be. Because, your perspective of not knowing all these people, but being, a journalist and coming at things from the standpoint of the audience and what makes good content, that is, that's so valuable. You're not worried about saying no to somebody who signed your paycheck. You're concerned with what makes a good story and helping them uncover what they have to offer. And I think that's really great. And something that's can't be said necessarily for internal folks who have a lot of politics. that they have to
Yeah.
deal with.
Yeah.
And we had a LinkedIn user note that they've seen other TV producers and journalists move from broadcast to agency PR work, and what were your defining factors, and would you go back if you could?
Good
Ooh,
question. People ask me that all the time. So for me, the defining factors to get out of the business were related to the lack of balance in my life and the fact that I was stuck in the doom and gloom cycle on rinse and repeat for years and years. So much so that at the end of my time at the TV station, I got called in for a breaking news story on a Sunday night. I was off, but I was the on-call reporter, and it was a shooting at a mall in a place called Buckhead, which is kind of an upscale shopping area in Atlanta.
yeah.
And I went there to report the story and ended up getting assaulted by a security guard who didn't like me being on the property. Like literally grabbed the phone out of my hand, forcefully.
Wow.
And that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. I was like, I am too old for this. I'm done. And it had been a progressive shift for me, especially during COVID, having been home more, and I've got 2 teenage kids, and realizing that they were not getting any younger, and I really wanted to be around more and more present
Yeah.
in their lives. It really, I felt like I had achieved everything I wanted to achieve in TV news. And so that was why I left, and took a job that gave me much better quality of life, more balance in my life. It was a remote position that I was working into, so I was able to be home more.
Yeah.
What was the second part of that question? I think there was another question about
Would you go back if you could?
would I go back? Yeah, I miss the storytelling. I miss the camaraderie of the newsroom. I miss all of that, but it's all the extraneous stuff and the politics that I don't miss. I've had an opportunity to kind of dip my toes back in the journalism waters a few times, and with this true crime brand that we just launched, I'm going to be asking people a lot of questions and creating content around it, and sort of putting out newsletters and videos and things like that. So I'm scratching the itch without actually jumping back into the deep end, and that's fine by me.
And probably without being assaulted, as one of our users said, that's probably fewer assaults in PR, and less
Right.
entertainment
At
PR.
least physical ones. Maybe there's plenty of verbal assaulting going on.
Well, we just call that social media conversations. Come on.
That's right. That's right. That's just in my average day on X.
Well, I do have to ask, of course, since I asked about what you're most proud of, is there something that you felt like was a big missed opportunity for
Mm,
for a client? Something where, it just the stars didn't align, or they just didn't get excited about it, but then somebody else ended up doing that same thing and it was amazing. Because to me, those are
yeah.
always the biggest bummers, when you have an idea and you pitch it to your client and they say, eh, and then you see someone else do it and it was awesome, and then you get kind of bummed.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely had situations where the either the pitches have fallen flat, like complete crickets, which is, I mean, anybody who works in PR for any length of time, you have to have a thick skin, because
Yeah.
most of what you send out is not going to get traction, right? So for
Yeah.
every 10 pitches, you might get one even response, if that. So, but I'm used to that in my former life, just getting getting rejected pretty frequently by either interviews or interviewees, or even in my own newsroom, getting through the gatekeepers.
Yeah.
But but as far as projects that I've worked on, there have been situations where I have suggested something to a client and they haven't gone for it. And then I have seen like a competitor end up in that particular publication talking about a similar topic. And it is a bummer. And I try not to be like, I told you so. But I told you so.
Just casually included in the, oh, here's some competitive coverage, just
Right.
FYI.
You should know. Yeah. I was sweeping the internet to see what your competitors were up to, and I came across this.
Love it. Well, I think we're just about out of time. So if folks want to hear more from you, either about PR or about this true crime brand, where can they find you?
Yeah. So my website is www.mikepetchenik.com. It's just my first name, last name, which is a doozy. So take a screenshot of this if you need to spell it. And if you want to learn more about the true crime brand, it's trialwatchers.com. And we have a book that just launched in, because it was June. And then we're launching our podcast actually this week. So your timing is fortuitous.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on here and giving me an excuse to chat with somebody who clearly loves doing this kind of thought leadership content just as much as I do. So thanks so much for being our guest.
It was my pleasure. Great talking to you.
And everybody else, we will see you next week on Content Chat. Take care.